Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Ben the Boat Painter, a relaxing look at life and nature on the canals as we paint two 48-foot narrowboats. And we're going to get straight in with the work this week. We are going to put on our first coat of top coat onto the back doors. We're also going to start work on the gunwhales. But before all that, we're going to apply our first coat of paint onto the sides, which is a very significant milestone. We're just mixing up some paint now. And before we do that though, we're going to have to make sure the sides are nice and clean without getting any dust in the water. Okay, it's important this bit. We have ourselves a rather dusty boat here, which we need to clean before we start painting, because we can't paint on a dusty surface. That is very unwise. And we don't want to just brush the dust off now because we're on a really beautiful waterway. We do not want to pollute this area that sustains so much wildlife and nature. So rather than brush the dust off, we're going to use our tack cloth, because the dust is going to remain stuck to the cloth and not going to float around in the air and end up in the water. You may wonder as well, as we were sanding, whether or not we were producing a lot of dust in the air, but the vast majority of the dust, I don't know if you can see that, remains impregnated into the sandpaper, sort of bright pink. Any of these paint flakes, again, most of that ends up in the rowing boat. And yeah, so rather than brush, we're just going to tack cloth and keep everything nice and clean. Okay, let's get going. Okay, here we go. We have our trusty Wilco brush at the ready, and we're going to paint the sides now. This, I suppose, is the hardest, well, the hardest. It requires the most concentration out of all the tasks we're going to do. And it's all about, yeah, keeping your eye on the ball, consistency. It's got to be a sort of, turn yourself into a machine, really. And we don't want to stop. It's going to take us about an hour, I think, to get to the end. And yeah, we want to do it, make a nice job here, because the sides are the showcase of the paint job, really. Masked off the sign. I don't want to be the first one to get a paint splat on the sign, so just one of the few things we will mask. We're not going to bother masking the window frames, because I'm confident we can get around them without creating a mess. There's plenty of red paint splats on them already, so I mean, even if I do splat a bit of paint on, it's not going to make much difference, to be honest. And well, talking of paint splats, one there already. So you've got to keep your eye on the ball here. Keep your eye on the ball. So the sun is on the other side of the boat, and as the day progresses, it's going to come over, and eventually it will be shining on this side. So if the sun was shining on this side, even if it's not that warm, it's not really a good situation, because direct sunlight really makes the paint dry far too quickly. And if you remember, when we were painting the hatch, we had relatively long brush strokes. We were getting a little bit worried that the paint might start drying before we had a chance to finish our strokes. Well, here, the strokes are far longer, so it's even more important. Come on now. So yeah, because of the temperatures, well, I'd say it's almost optimum temperature, really. We can take our time a little bit here, so we don't have to work too quickly. See, the sun's coming out now. So if that sun was shining directly on here, I think the surface would almost be too hot. I mean, it's not that hot now, but with the direct sunlight, the paint's just going to dry so quickly. And then we've got to look back. So even though we're at this stage now, always good to check back, because some drips have formed here, so always periodically check back. And even when I'm doing that, I can feel that the paint has dried considerably more than here, so I'm at risk of making quite an ugly mark there, so got to be careful of that. And by the time we've finished this whole stretch, the sun will still be on the other side of the boat. But when it comes to this side and starts shining on this side, that's good because it's going to help the paint harden. Okay, here comes the window. So probably try and use a bit less thinner when we're going around the window, because our brush strokes are a lot shorter anyway, so we don't need the thinner to help us as much. And the less thinner there is in it, the less likelihood it's going to drip. So got to be careful though. Yeah, it's covered in red paint splats, but I don't want to add to them. The window panes themselves are also covered in paint splats, but there is a way to get rid of them. I'm not concerned about them in the slightest. We'll be able to get rid of them nice and easy. Now, I've got to remember this, there is a risk that when I do sort of that, oh no, here you go, that, like that, when I flick the brush up like that, it could get some paint splats on the roof, which we don't want. We're very proud of our roof, you see. We're very proud of what we've done on the roof. So that is probably the first thing to check once we've finished, is that we haven't got any paint splat on the roof. Ah, drip, 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 drip. Check back again. See, there's probably another little drip up there, but in doing that over it to flatten it down, I might actually make it worse. So I'm going to leave that, and we can sand it down anyway. So yeah, another 2 coats after this, and then a nice thorough sand down, and then we'll see maybe another coat of undercoat, you never know. Yes, let's have a little spin in the rowing boat, shall we? There you go. One side nearly finished. Okay, and that gives us an opportunity to briefly admire our handiwork. We're going to come back to the sides later on this episode, but for now, let's turn our attention to the rear doors. So away we go. First coat of top coat on the back doors, and we want to get this finished. Well, I'm keen to get this finished quite soon because I really want to get started on the back deck, and we don't want to be kind of stepping around on the back deck that's been freshly painted while we're doing this. So this needs to get finished first. And in fact, you can see, or maybe you can't quite see, but I just painted this deck here with the first coat of top coat, and then a couple of days later I put the stool on here so I could reach up and paint the back hatch, and I've left some marks. I've made some marks on the fresh paint where the stool was standing. So yeah, that just goes to show you, really, just because paint is dry to the touch doesn't mean to say that it's fully hardened yet. So you've got to be mindful about protecting paint, continuing to protect paint as if it's wet, even though it may have been a couple of days since it dried. I mean, I'm still feeling like I want to sand this smooth, continue to kind of sand it in order to smooth the surface, but strictly speaking, once you finish your undercoat, the surface should really be as smooth as you want it to be, because the top coat is a lot thinner than the undercoat. There's less of an opportunity to sand it smooth, because if you start sanding it smooth, you're just going to actually be removing too much material, so you're actually going to be removing quite a big proportion of the top coat you've just put on, so it kind of defeats the point. That's what undercoat's for, really. So, because when we're painting the side, we don't really have this luxury of being able to stop and just check, because we have to keep going. But because we've got this natural break in the surface anyway, we can stop as long as we want, you know. Some little drips coming across the top there, so we'll just sort them out before we proceed. Now, yeah, I've gone back. I've noticed a drip forming there. I've gone back, but I've made it worse because the paint now is too dry to correct. And we'll be able to sand it down because there's 2 more coats, but really I should have just left that. But law of averages, you can't get it right every time, you know. So we do our best. We do our best. Okay, first coat of top coat on the back doors, finished. And with that task out of the way, we can turn our attention back to the sides. And we've applied 3 coats of undercoat to the first side. If you remember, if you're applying undercoat on consecutive days, there's no need to sand in between coats. But we're going to sand down the 3rd coat, ready for our next coat, which was going to be a 50-50 mix of undercoat and top coat. We don't need to give it such a rigorous sand as we did the original paint, because the undercoat's going to be a little bit softer than the original surface we painted. Not only is it going to prepare the surface to accept the next layer of paint, but it's also going to create a smoother surface as well, so it's going to look a lot nicer. So, what next for the sides? Well, I've been giving this some thought actually. I think, well, first things first, we get a bit of filler around some of these other imperfections here. There's not many of them though, so it won't take very long. I've considered putting filler around the kind of edges of the vinyl stickers as well, but I think a combination of filler and vinyl sticker is maybe asking for trouble further down the line. I think that could potentially look very messy years down the line if something goes wrong. I think we're going to hold back on the paint for a bit because of the gunnels. Now, I've decided I think it would be best if we strip the paint from the gunnels, because, well, this in particular you can see here is extremely rough. There's also perhaps some significant rust treatment we want to do on this section here. We're also going to be spending quite a lot of time putting the non-slip texture on. So yeah, we want a really nice base to work on. We don't want it to fail years down the line because we're going to put quite a lot of effort into this section. So we're going to be using paint stripper again. And we want to do it now, because if, say, we put our final top coat on this bit and then we're using paint stripper on this, if we splash any paint stripper on our finished paint, that is, like, obviously a complete disaster. So I think we should get this done first before we do any more paint on the sides. So let's get cracking. Okay, so here we are on the gunnels. Pronounced gunnels, spelt Gunwhales, Gunwhales, gunnels, though. And we mentioned we're gonna strip the paint. I was considering painting over what we've got here. I mean, this is a very rough surface, it's just about doable here, but when we get nearer the back of the boat, we saw earlier that it's very, very nasty surface. It's particularly bad here because water from the roof drains, there's a little kind of channel there, water from the roof drains down here, and it just doesn't run off here, it just tends to puddle here. So you can see this is very, very flaky, very rusty, so I think there's no way we could paint over this. We need to strip this back, so we might as well do the whole thing while we're at it. And I mentioned we're going to use paint stripper as we did with the hatch and the deck, and every time I use paint stripper I kind of feel a twinge of guilt, because it really is not a very nice chemical substance, is it? It's not very nice at all. So But then it struck me, what are the alternatives? Well, oh look, there's swallows up on the tree there. They're usually on the cable. But the most normal thing to do would be to use power tools such as an angle grinder with some kind of spinning disc or a wire brush, a spinning wire brush, something like that. But if we do that, where's the paint going to go? Well, it's going to be ground down into a fine powder. It's going to just billow out into the air, and of course, it's going to land in the water, which is bad situation. If we didn't do that, we would, as I used to do, use this little scraper and just with brute force, just kind of whack it, and eventually, if you put enough effort in, the paint will come off. Now that's a lot better in terms of keeping the paint under control, because the majority of it's going to go in the rowing boat, but because we're removing the paint at sort of high velocity, it's still going to propel a proportion of the paint into the air, and it's going to end up in the water. Now, when we're using our paint stripper, however, do you remember when we stripped the back deck? I think it was in episode 4. We were using very little effort. We were just kind of, with one hand, just slowly lifting the paint off. So we've got complete control over where the paint's going. The paint breaks down into much larger flakes, which are covered in the gel, which kind of weighs them down. If there's a little bit of a breeze in the air, but I don't think it'd be strong enough to blow any of that stripped paint off. So we've got total control of what we're doing. Because we're working slowly, if anything does go in the water, we can scoop it up with, I don't know, I'll get a cup or something like that, or some sort of sieve. So, having initially felt quite guilty about using the paint stripper, I actually feel now, although I accept the fact that that chemical paint stripper exists in the world is not a good thing, in terms of harming our immediate environment, I think it's, well, paradoxically, the best solution. So, on that bombshell, let's get cracking. Okay, here we go. Just got an old brush. No point using a new brush for this because it's going to absolutely wreck this brush, quite frankly. Just decanted the last of the old bottle into this little plastic pot. It's gone orange, which I don't know whether that's because this was an orange tiramisu dessert pot, or I think more likelihood is that some rust from the old pot has just got in there. It'll still work fine. I left the old bottle out in the rain, but it'll be fine. So just going to be careful not to get any here, obviously. So if we do, it's not the end of the world because we've got plenty of chance to fix that. And also that none dribbles down the side as well, because we do not want that either. These days, anything that saves me a bit of physical effort is actually become increasingly desirable. So, you know, I always thought that I'd get old gradually, but it seemed to happen quite suddenly. You just got to accept it, really. The sooner you accept it, the better. And we're not going to apply stripper to the whole length of the gunnels. We're going to break it up into little sections. So what I find is once you've stripped the paint or applied the paint stripper and it's done its work and the paint is starting to lift off, the paint almost, if you leave it too long, the paint almost sort of reattaches itself a little bit. So the optimum time to get it is 20 minutes after you've applied it in this particular case. So here we are, continuing to apply our first coat of paint stripper. We'll put the second coat on 20 minutes after this, and then once the second coat has had a similar amount of time to take effect, we can come back with our stripping blade and physically remove the paint, which by that time should have started to lift off the metal on its own. It just needs a bit of encouragement to get it off completely. And as I said, we're going to split the gunnel up into sections, because if you imagine if we did the entire thing in one go, you can see it lifting off there, it would have dried out by the time we got to the end of the gunnel. Okay, so let's get on with actually stripping the paint now. I might have left it a little bit too long. I found loads of green shieldbug nymphs in the bushes over there. As you know, I'm very easily distracted by the wildlife around here. But we need to get this sorted now because the strip is going to dry out if we leave it any longer. So I've got a brand new scraper. We're going to benefit from having a really sharp blade. There we go. Got a sieve just in case anything does go in the water. We'll be able to scoop it out. Better put my mask on because I can start to feel the fumes are really starting to take effect now. So yeah, hopefully this won't be too difficult and we'll have a nice flat surface once we've stripped the paint. So fingers crossed. Okay, not bad at all. We haven't got, you're right there, we haven't got rid of everything, but I'm very happy with that. You can see a large portion of the gunnel is now bare metal. We have the odd area like this that's still got some paint on, but what happened in this particular area was there's some filler here. And if you remember on the back hatch, when we were scraping the paint off the filler, it was creating some very nasty marks. So I've kind of, and also the paint wasn't really coming off the filler readily anyway, so I've kind of left that. I didn't want to damage the filler and make more marks, so I'm happy to leave that. Generally speaking, we've got quite a smooth surface, so success, I would say. Well, it's nearly time to move the boat along again, but it's going to be very hard to say goodbye to this place. Had a really good time here, really good time. We're actually going to move the boat back onto the River Lee because I'm a little bit conscious of the fact there's quite a lot of work to do before the winter sets in, and being back on the Lee is going to accelerate our workflow. Just a bit more of a convenient place to work. You can turn the boat around wherever you like. You have probably better access to the boat from the towpath. Also more convenient access to the shops if you need any supplies. So back to the Lee it is. We're going to be back on the River Stort reasonably soon, beginning of next year, sort of end of February to the end of April. We're going to be on the Stort again. So we'll revisit this beautiful place and hopefully see it in springtime, which is going to be nice. Funny thing is, I always go through this thought process when it's time to move the boat, even after 15 years. When it's time to move, I always think, I don't want to move. I want to stay here forever. It's such a cool place. Only to think when we actually arrive in our new place, I'm like, this is such an amazing place, amazing new spot. We're going to have such a good time here. So no doubt it'll be exactly the same as always. But I don't know, this place is particularly difficult to say goodbye to. Had a really nice time. Well, onwards we cruise, and it's time to wind down another episode. And what better way to do that than have a little look at some of the wildlife and nature highlights we've enjoyed during our stay here.